Hello, and welcome to the Early American Brass Band podcast. I'm Chris Triano, joined always by Stephen Canistrisi.
Hello.
This is episode 31, and today we're doing an interview with Bill Gay. Bill Gay is the current leader of the 2nd Cavalry Brigade Band and the 6th Ohio Mounted Buglers, and he was the co-founder of the Americus Brass Band and Saxton's Cornet Band. Bill has been very important in this early American brass band revival movement, and we are extremely excited to have him on the show today.
Yeah, it's definitely great to get the perspective of someone who's started or been involved in the early days of, I think, 4, if not more, of these, Civil War era reenactment bands. So it was really, really great to have him on, and we're glad that he took the time to speak with us. If you like what you're hearing, you can support the show on Patreon and Teespring. You can also find us on all social media platforms, and we have a website that's eabbpodcast.com. There are a lot of resources as well as show notes for each episode up there with a bunch of links to things that we mentioned in the episode or things that are relevant to each episode. So we do hope that you'll check that out. And I think 31 episodes into this, I'm finally getting a little better at doing that, that whole stretch. So I think without any further ado, we can get into episode 31 with Bill Gay. So here it is.
Thank you so much, Bill Gay, for coming onto the Early American Brass Band podcast. We really appreciate you taking time out of your morning to speak with us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Can you give us a little bit about your background of, kind of how you started musically and maybe how you got interested in the field and what brought you up to your first major experience with early American brass bands?
Well, sure. As most others, I started playing cornet in elementary school. Everybody starts in elementary school, it seems.
Yeah.
But what was unusual about me is living in Southern California. At the tender age of 13, I joined a very professional quality youth band, the Long Beach Junior Concert Band. And it was huge. It was over 100 players plus pageantry. And because it was a youth band and not a school band, Hollywood and others would use that band for promos. We'd do movie openings, be in the movies, Rams games, use the fanfare trumpets for an Olympic once out there. So it got me very used to the entertainment side of playing in bands. And it instilled into me the need to really entertain the people, which I carried through to historic Civil War bands. Played in the youth band up until college. Became a music major in college and wanted to be a band director. Spent several years in college because I enjoyed it so much, the 12 years senior type thing practically. Yeah. And played in the marching bands, joined the choir, and it started as a brass major, ended up a voice major. And it was in my first year of college when I got involved in my first Civil War band.
Awesome. So was the Civil War and that Civil War band kind of more or less a random encounter, or had you been interested in the Civil War and history kind of prior to that?
Well, I always loved the Civil War history, and I loved bands. So a fellow recruited me into a reenactment unit in 76, probably 76. And I went to the reenactment. I was laying in camp with him under the stars with the fire and all that. And I just mentioned to him, hey, you're in marching band at Cal State Long Beach. I'm in the marching band at Long Beach City College. Didn't they have bands in the Civil War? Could we combine our interests? And he goes, they did have bands. And then that was the genesis for the Americus Brass Band right there, my very first reenactment.
Very cool.
Gotcha.
How was the process of kind of getting that band together? I know you guys both knew that music existed. What kind of research went into forming that first band, and how did you get decide on the instruments that you used and all that kind of stuff for that very first project that you put together?
Well, we were so interested in the idea. As soon as we got home, the next day, I think, we got together and went to the library, and we found some of those early 1960 publications of Civil War bands. I still have some of those books, and we poured through them. We had no idea any other Civil War bands existed, reenactment bands or recreation bands.
Mm-hmm.
So we were just going kind of off the books. So we hit antique stores and all. And our very first set of instruments were everything from shepherd's crook cornets to side action maraphone trumpets to maraphone altos and tenors. We had a trombonium, if you've ever heard of that crazy instrument.
Yeah, very nice.
E-flat tubas, we got the percussion together. And at the very next reenactment, we got our schoolmates involved. We threw together some uniforms and played it the next month's reenactment. So it was really fast, the very first incarnation.
Very cool. So
Gotcha.
you were kind of basically going out trying to find as old of instruments as you could, kind of thing.
Yeah,
When you were getting
photographs of the original bands best we could. That's all we knew to do.
instruments like tromboniums and such at the time, did you think that those were Civil War period, or again you were just trying to go as kind of early as you could find at the time?
No, we knew they weren't the Civil War horns exactly we were finding in the books. We were getting as close as we could at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, after we got that set together and played our first gig, we stumbled across the fact that a band called the First Brigade Band existed. And immediately, oh, where do you get your instruments? We play close as we can get. And we got a letter back from them saying, which is ironic since that was 1976, that they were saying, where do you get your instruments? Because we can't keep these antiques forever. We're starting to look at maybe getting reproductions or something instead, which they never did.
Yeah, that's true.
A wonderful band playing those original horns. Music was a problem. We used little elementary band book collections for Americana, the first gig. But after we discovered the First Brigade Band, we found the Fresnel recordings that they did in the 60s. And with my first year music theory class knowledge, I started actually listening to the record over and over again and pulling off every single instrument, writing it out on a score.
Oh, wow.
And I think I got it pretty accurately. So we were playing some of the more basic tunes right off of transcribing it off the record.
Oh, that's incredible. And that's in some ways kind of more authentic to the time period too, right? Hearing music and writing it down or borrowing it from other bands in that way. So that's really cool that you were able to kind of find the music that way.
Definitely helps to internalize it a lot better when you're wearing out the record.
So years and years later, when we started getting the microfilm for our arrangements, that old knowledge helped me because, as you guys know, the original microphone parts, when you put them on a score, do not always match up. There's all kinds of mistakes in that music, and you have to make an editorial decision on how to fix it to make your band works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now, I was wondering, this might be going back a bit, but when you're talking about the early days of the Americus Brass Band there, what was kind of the goal of the band? I mean, hearing you talk through, like how you're getting instruments and how you're getting music really reminds me a lot of how Chris, started the band at Mason and, just getting instruments that are close to Civil War era, and then gradually approaching your way back. But I mean, and talking to you and talking to Richard Berkmeyer last week. Well, I guess that was just a few days ago for us, but when the episodes get released, it was a couple weeks ago. Was the goal to do reenactments? Was the goal to kind of like, a little bit of self-education about the music of the time period, or what were you guys, really trying to do with that first, the early days there?
The very first, we wanted to bring something to the Civil War reenactment living history world. And what we thought we can contribute is our musical knowledge and our band knowledge. But what happened very early on is we discovered and the amusement park world discovered us. So even in its first year, we started working at the Knott's Berry Farm Amusement Park. And they just started hiring us as a professional band. At first, we were just doing weekends only, but later on, it became a full-time job for many of the members of the band. So then it started to become difficult to do living history because we had all these weekend engagements at the big amusement park. It sort of created a bit of a rift in the band. I was more interested in living history. Some of the bandmen were thinking, well, now we've got professional gig. I kind of like the idea of making money doing it. So there was a bit of a money hassle because some members of the band, the leadership, wanted to hold the money together to buy horns and even buy everybody a rifle, which never made any sense to me. I was torn between keeping the money all together to buy more horns and uniforms and making a living because I was an 18-year-old kid going to college. I thought this could be a good money maker for me. I only stayed in the original incarnation of Americus Band, which we called the 4th Georgia Regimental Band then, for maybe 2-3 years before I thought, I'm going to start my own union band and we're going to do things a little different. So, yeah, so for a while there, I was out of the Americus Brass Band.
Is that union band that you formed a few years later a group that was in California also, or did that go somewhere else?
No, it was in Southern California. I'm still in Southern California at the time. It did a few gigs and parades and all, and reenactments, but it sort of fell by the wayside. And I was out of the brass band world, still doing bugling and other reenacting until 1984, where I joined the 16th Maine Band that would also go by the Union Brass Band. A fellow named Dean Mora, who's still an active musician in California, I believe, started that band, and I joined up, and we used a match set of Rob Stewart reproduction horns.
Nice.
And I got to learn the pros and cons of using them. I stayed in that band. We tried the Rob Stewart horns, and although they're wonderfully made and they're beautiful horns, if you shut your eyes and a band full of reproduction horns plays, and then a band of original horn plays, you can hear the difference. To me, the reproductions sound heavier, kind of brighter, more sizzly, more like a modern horn. Same thing is if you put modern mouthpieces in the horns. You sort of then turn them into a hybrid reproduction original horn. So I feel you should use original mouthpieces and you should use original horns. Otherwise, just the thinness and thickness of the metal, the shallowness of the cup of the mouthpiece, it just changes the sound. It also, I found it's easier to play the original horns in tune when you use the deep V mouthpieces. You can bend the notes so much easier. Once you get used to those little rims, I think our endurance is better on it. They sure keep you honest, and there's no pressing that horn against your mouth hard to try to keep going. You gotta keep touch. So that's my feelings, is keep it all original if you can.
Do you have a personal collection kind of amassed as well, or are you kind of not super interested in amassing a personal collection of horns?
I do. If I could afford it, I love these horns. Of course I would. I actually owned a full set that the Saxton's band used. And although some of them didn't have to be used all the time, because there's a big turnover when you start a band usually. But as you get your guys that stick around, they start buying their own horns. So I had a full set of Civil War band instruments, and I sold them to the band when I moved to Ohio. And after several years, I started missing them and regretting that I sold them. Just a few weeks ago, I visited Mark Elrod back east, and he says, "Hey, Bill, you remember this horn?" And I go, "That's my old alto, my old over-the-shoulder alto. I played in Saxton's. Elrod bought it." Why did I sell that? So anyway, no, I only own maybe personally 2 horns, 2 or 3, 2 B flats. But like I say, the band itself will end up owning the set. Before I rejoined the Americus Brass Band in 1986, in time for the 125th anniversary reenactments, we'd go back east and play all around.
Gotcha. So when you rejoined the Americas at that point, was that as a member, or did they still bring you on kind of in a a leadership advisory kind of position?
No, I wasn't a leader at all at that time. Then I was no longer considered co-founder leader. I was just a bandsman. As David Goins joked around with the Americus Saxton's band interview, I would demote myself to the position to make room for better players. I do that even today. So I played alto in that band, and I played bass drum in that band, wherever they needed me. I was just happy to be back in it because I had missed it by that.
Gotcha. What kind of events did you guys do for the 125th at that time?
Oh, we did the 125th Manassas battle. A big Texas regiment hired us and flew us out there to be part of that. Nice. We came back for the 125th Gettysburg reenactment. So, but we were also doing movies at that time. Still playing at the amusement park, and at that time, some of the members were full-time musicians at Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland.
They were hired as Civil War musicians at those parks, or they were?
No, at Knott's Berry Farm, we fit the theme. So they were the like Knott's Berry Farm militia band.
Okay.
They played in Ghost down there. But at Disneyland, they would wear all different kinds of costumes and play all different crazy instruments.
Gotcha, makes sense. So you were involved with Americus when they did, was it Gettysburg and Glory as well? Were you a part of the band for those projects?
I missed out on Glory just by a few months because I headed out east and to start the Saxton's band. But Gettysburg movie was odd because they used the sound of the Americus Band, but they used the image of my Saxton's band. We played live there too, but they already had it in the can. They didn't realize my band could also play. And so that was a little bit of irony that an old band and a new band came together for the Gettysburg movie.
Yeah.
I knew when I was going to go out east with Dr. Philippa Burgess, who was like my partner and co-conspirator in getting Saxtons together, we were buying up instruments in California to prepare for the Kentucky band. So it was a project kind of overlapped with America.
Gotcha. So did you end up living in Kentucky, or you just happened to form the band there?
No, we lived there. Dr. Burgess was getting her doctorate in early brass band American music. That's what she did her doctorate dissertation on. Mm-hmm. And researching it out was part of the reason for starting Saxtons. And I got to be a research assistant and putting that dissertation together. So I learned a lot more than I knew previously from that. Yeah. And she's got the dissertation book out there and she did a good job on that. But that's why we moved to Kentucky and lived in Kentucky.
When Americus was getting put together versus when Saxtons was getting put together, there was different information that was readily available on Civil War brass bands, and obviously the knowledge within people of the community grew between that time. What are some, I don't know, it's a good way of asking this, maybe what are some differences between the two in terms of founding them, or maybe I don't know, Stephen, what am I thinking?
I guess, how did the processes for both bands differ? I mean, I know that starting both bands differ. Sorry, I forgot a word there, but I know you were younger when the Americus Brass Band started. So obviously with Saxtons, you had a little bit more experience and, knowledge, but maybe, kind of what were the differences, probably mainly with the goals of the two bands? Yeah. I'd assume they'd be somewhat different.
Yeah, that was in 1989 that we started the Saxtons band, so it's still pretty early. Some of the goals were the same. We hit right in the golden years of Civil War reenacting, so we were busy. We got a lot of good paid gigs and living history gigs at the time, but we also would play more for the academic setting as well at the universities, which Americus didn't start out doing. We played at the International Tuba Euphonium Conference. We do university recitals, but we'd also be out and be a battle band in the field. And another thing we hadn't talked about is I got into vintage dancing so that I could better interpret the dance music of the period. And we ended up getting picked kind of found by the vintage dance societies, and we play a lot of balls too with the band. Americus and Saxtons kept very busy doing a lot of the practical, actual things that the original bands of the era did.
Mm-hmm. With Americus, and when that formed as like a reenacting type of unit specifically, for reenactments, I'm assuming you guys would go out and do the overnight things. Did that type of overnight camping eventually dwindle with Americus? And then likewise, was that ever a component of Saxton's kind of existence?
It always was, because I felt, it grounded us and kept it in context of what it was. So the poor old Americus band, even when they got to be professional full-time bandsmen because of starting out in the Civil War band, would still take to the field and stay in tents. Saxton, same thing. These guys didn't really own any of the camping equipment, but we'd erect a big assembly tent with a stove in it, and we'd all have to sleep in it. We found it a very good bonding experience, and like I said, helped put it all in context of our living history, material culture experience, you might call it. So no, Saxton's, for the 10 or 11 years I was in charge of Saxton's band, we still would sleep in the field for a reenactment. And if we had a nice tour or a regular concert series, we stayed in hotels. So we kind of had it good both ways.
Yeah, there you go. What do you see as the role of maybe at first a Civil War reenactor, just as an infantry type of field reenactor, in terms of Civil War education to the public, and then applying that to a brass band who sees themselves as Civil War reenactors, as a Civil War brass band? What is maybe their role in education for the public?
I think it's an important role, because any Americana history that we do properly and right can educate, either by reading about it or watching it in the field and seeing everything just right. Some people think I'm a bit of a hardcore because I'm so insistent on every detail being correct. But that's why I do it, because I think our role is education. It's why we use period glasses. It's why we get every button stitched right on our uniform buttonholes. Everything we try to do is just try to get perfect. So yeah, I think it's education. But my philosophy is the only way to educate people with these bands is to entertain them too. So without sacrificing any authenticity, we try to be as lively and as exciting and as relevant in the context that we're performing as we can, because they go hand in hand. The show business aspect, which was true back then too, of being entertaining, and the historic aspect can come all together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Have you had any experience with the idea of bias maybe tainting authenticity, or select interpretations maybe affecting the quality of the education that the reenactors are trying to give?
Well, sure. It's maybe the political correctness of revisionist history can get in the way of a proper display of educational entertainment. And we don't feel very bad about, our conscience is clear because of our goal of telling the story as it really was. It's sad is that we're an all-male band, for one thing. There were no women in Civil War bands. There's no documentation whatsoever there ever was. Now, that hurts, because think of all the fine players we could use if we could allow women in the band. But if we did that, we're letting the young ladies of today think there was never a struggle. There was never a time when women were not allowed to do certain projects. They can think that, oh, women can do anything men can do, they always could. But that's not true. So in a way, I don't know if that's what you mean, but we don't sacrifice any historicity for political correctness. And I understand Saxton's new take on they're going to drop the uniforms, drop the living history, material culture from their project, wear modern concert attire and have women and men all together. And that's fine and important because they can still authentically recreate the sounds of the time period.
Mhm.
And now they're telling half the story. But that's not really a horrible thing. If I wouldn't feel terrible about being in a university Civil War band that wore modern concert attire and had men and women all mixed in together.
Mhm.
But I just think it's important to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Also, you were asking what's the importance of modern Civil War band recreations is it puts a link. It helps tell where we are today with wind ensembles and brass bands. It helps us understand where we are now by where they started out. I think that's another important reason to do these bands.
Yeah, and that's been a major theme through the podcast or the project that Siva and I are doing too. We keep on coming back to the fact that students of music a lot of times go through college programs and play in bands and study music history and come out and all they know is like orchestral history. They don't know anything about the band history that they're going off into the world to teach, so knowing this brass band tradition, the Civil War history, we think is important for fully informing, what people are planning on doing out in the career and public education with teaching bands and stuff, kind of providing the full context for stuff there. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what you have going on currently and your current bands and multiple projects that you have going on?
Well, sure. After it was time to leave Lexington, Kentucky, and get a job at the Ohio Historical Society, I took a job there. We actually sold the Saxton's band all the instruments, uniform, music. We owned it all. Back to the band, and then went and I took a break from Civil War Brass Band for a while in Ohio. After a while, of course, I missed it. And then a fellow named John Huffman, I found out he was starting a Columbus-based Civil War band, the 73rd OVI Regimental Band. And so I joined up with him and played with him for a while. And then I still do. I'm still a faithful member of that infantry band. But after doing that for several years, 2017, as recently as that, is when I started my own band because I thought, well, heck, I've done a lot, but there hasn't been a lot of representation of the Civil War cavalry bands, and there were a lot of them. And so somebody needs to do a mounted brass band, a Civil War era mounted brass band. I had a lot of horse experience from my Kentucky days because when I moved to Kentucky, what are you going to do? You got to buy a horse. And so I got pretty good at riding out there. And eventually, after moving to Ohio, took a job as a full-time horseman. I was a full contact jouster, traveling all around the country for a living, literally trying to knock people off horses. Got to be pretty good at riding horses. And so after I retired from that, joined a Civil War band. It wasn't long after until I wanted to put those interests together and do a mounted Civil War band.
Gotcha. Were you by any chance? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
I was just going to ask an unrelated question if you ever did anything at the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair, because I grew up pretty close to where they have that, and there was always in the summer there was the end event for the day was like a joust because they had a story that ran throughout the day throughout the whole fair. Yeah, and
lots of
I've been there.
We did Texas, we did there's Maryland, Canada, Florida, but we didn't do the Pennsylvania one.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's not a huge one, but it was always a like a school field trip that we would do. But that's unrelated to.
Of course, I brought fanfare trumpets out, and I was playing like Renaissance natural horn stuff in between my jousting because, of course, I had to.
Yeah. Of course. So, can you give a little bit of the historical background and context for these mounted brass bands? We haven't had the opportunity to talk about this type of ensemble or this type of variant, on the show before.
Well, precisely like the infantry bands, at the very first years of the Civil War, cavalry regiments were allowed to have a 16-man brass band, every regiment. And as we all know, with the attrition rate in regiments, pretty soon it took about 4 regiments to equal the original number of a regiment, and they'd form brigades out of the regiments, and they thought there were too many brass bands. So just like the infantry, each brigade could and often did, a cavalry brigade would have a brass band. Their duties were precisely as the infantry brass bands, with the added chore of during battle, most often the cavalry band stayed mounted and would escort the troops and do everything that the cavalry troopers were doing, but their brass instruments. The band I've been studying the most is General Custer's band, the Michigan Brigade Band. And that band started out as a hired group of professionals by the 7th Michigan. Their colonel was rich, and so he purchased the band. And at the time Custer took over, at around the time of Gettysburg, it was still a regimental band because it was a hired band. It wasn't dismissed with the other regimental bands when it turned into a brigade band. Custer took that band away from the colonel, added guys from all the different regiments of his brigade, and came up with his own band. That mounted band acted as a bodyguard for him, and all his battles, the famous battles you hear about Custer fighting in the Civil War, were accompanied to a soundtrack. He'd play with them right on the battle line, or he'd have them play on the battle line right with him. And even in a few instances, like a Trevilian station where they got surrounded, the band was forced to draw sabers and help hack out of a trap of an encirclement. And so the bandsmen had to train as actual fighting combat troopers as well, which I'll never understand how that poor tuba player managed to hack his way out of a trap with the big over-the-shoulder tuba at his side. And so, but they did it somehow.
They stick the saber in the bell and then use the instrument as a holder.
I was gonna say maybe that contributed some of the dents. They're whacking people on the head with their tuba.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel sorry for them. I mean, that must be rough.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Sheridan had a band. A lot of the regiments, the cavalry regiments, had a band. We had the flare.
Gotcha.
Was there any variant of the type of instruments that were used on them, or were they using the same equipment that infantry regiment bands would be using?
I wondered that myself, and when I was putting this together, I thought, well, I guess we won't get to have percussion. There's no way they used a full percussion section, and I've never seen drawings or photographs of timpani. So I guess no drums. And then I researched more. I found out those cavalry bands were precisely like the infantry bands, including snare, bass, and cymbals mounted.
Yeah, well.
I found photographs of a mounted snare drummer. I've researched and figured out how they strapped on the bass drum, attached it to the saddle, laying out flat to the guy's side with a big horse surcingle around it. I think the reason for that is our bands were considered, or cavalry was considered sort of dragoons in the dragoon tradition, where they were expected to get off their horses quite often and fight on foot. You can't do that with a timpani, but you can have all the musicians and percussionists dismount and march the troops around on foot till they get back to their horses. So yeah, it was just the same as the infantry bands, except they were generally no more than 16.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's incredible.
Did the music they played differ? Obviously you're detailing a lot of the differences between a cavalry band and, kind of like let's say like a foot regimental band. But I'm wondering if the repertoire or the music changed along with their like slightly different function, in a day-to-day life.
I don't believe so. I've never found a set of cavalry books. But in my research, I found a lot of the repertoire they played. Custer would use tunes to signal his men on what they were going to do. When Custer had his band, which was right next to him, strike up Yankee Doodle, there's eyewitness quotes. There's the troopers that had write memories say all hands went to their saber hilt because it meant there was going to be a charge. So he used it kind of to inspire them and to signal a little bit of what they were going to do.
What's the process like of trying to acclimate a horse to accept having these things played on them? Is there any type of training for that, or do they inherently like the sounds of baritones being played on them?
They do seem to like it. I was worried about that at first, but a lot of my horses I'd already been doing cavalry bugling with, and they're used to the cannons and the guns. They adapted pretty fast. The other new horses, we take them out before we do a show, and we get them used to it. We let them smell the horns, feel the vibrations, all. We're finding that if the horses are feeling a little antsy before a parade, as soon as we start playing, they calm down a bit. Wow. And when you'll see in our videos, if you look at some of our YouTube videos of us going down the street, watch their legs, because they phase in and out a bit. But as we're playing, they start marching in step a little bit. And then one of them, you can see a photo or a video of us where one of them gets out of step and the horse next to him kind of goes over it, like he's going to take a nip out of him. I'm sure it was coincidence, but we like to say that they're trying to keep in step.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's calming. We were worried about the cymbals more than anything, but we still haven't had really a problem with the cymbals. And
do you put the cymbals mounted on the bass drum, or you have a separate cymbal player?
Separate cymbal player, and in fact, there's a Civil War diary from the cymbal player in a mounted band that my co-conspirator John Connors has found, and he's quoting from it and putting it on our Facebook page and all. But what we do is we strap the cymbal to the cymbal player's left thigh, right thigh, and then he keeps the other cymbal in his hand, and so he still has his hand on the ring, and he just plays the cymbal against his own thigh.
Are most of the players playing without holding onto the horse, onto the reins then? Or do you find out a way to hold everything together?
Yeah, every single player except the snare drummer has got their left hand on the reins. They're playing one-handed. We've figured out some clever ways to put straps on the horns, mostly as a oops, like something went wrong, and instead of dropping the horn, it just hangs on their chest. Mm-hmm. We have found that the over-the-shoulder horns work the best, because now they're resting on your shoulder and your hands on the valves, your left hand's on the reins. The snare drummer will loop usually the reins around his wrist, and we put him in the back, in the middle a lot of times, and we find a horse that likes to follow other horses, and so he can play cadences along without really his hands on the reins so much.
Yeah, there you go. Man, that's incredible. So similar to kind of the question that we asked about comparing Saxons to Americus, did the mounted band have any similarities or differences to Saxons and Americus in terms of the goal, the formation, kind of those same questions that we had earlier?
I formed the 2nd Cavalry Brigade Band for the same reasons. I formed the Saxton's Band for education and educating by entertaining. The best outcome that's coming from the mounted band is we're bringing American Brass Band music, original arrangements, and sound and original horns to an audience that never would have seen them before. A philosophy of mine is if you get everything perfect and then you play it in a right and you play a concert in a recital hall, but there's more people in the band than the audience, what are you really doing? Now, with our very first year of being a mixed instrument band was last year, and we had maybe 12 gigs, most of them with really big audiences. We played at the Henry Ford Museum at the Greenfield Village for Memorial Day, and thousands of people got to hear this music that maybe wouldn't have noticed it. We were on schedule this year before the pandemic shut everything down to play the Equine Affair in Columbus. That's a 3-night event in a Fantasia auditorium with 5,000 people for each of the 3 nights. We were going to go in there and play 4 tunes and bring in the American flag. And those people would have been a captured audience to hear the original, band repertoire. So we're finding that the horse band is so popular that it's really going to get those original arrangements out. A lot of people are going to get to hear them in all different kinds of venues.
Yeah, and I've been seeing how actively a lot of the Facebook content for the band is shared in circles kind of outside of the band realm too. A lot of the I don't know, you can call it more generic Civil War fan page, more just like history sites really latch on to sharing the Cavalry Band videos and stuff also. So yeah, definitely sharing it with a large audience for sure.
It's the show business that I learned about when I was just a little 13-year-old kid in the youth band. The fact that the Cavalry Bands all had white-colored horses. So we all have white-colored horses. Yeah. Between us personally and 2 of the band members, we have 9 of them. And then we have locals that are kind enough to lend us some others. So when we go out there, they're matching white horses, and it's really attractive, and it really gets a lot of interest. It gets the people all around us, and then we play this beautiful music. I almost think that if an infantry band was, say, at Greenfield Village in one of the little lots playing, it would get some attention and people would love it. It would be great. But we ride up and march around in the parades on the horses, or we pull up in a lot, and people will run up to us because they all want to see the horses. Then we play the music, and it's like, oh, it also keeps us really at a high level. We're up on horses. So when we do our parades and all, we're more noticeable. The horses are the real stars, and we're just kind of playing our horns.
Yeah, there you go.
One thing we hadn't talked about is how you do these bands financially. Might be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
The philosophy of Americus Band when it first started was the band would hold all the money and then end up paying a little back per diem to the guys to play. And, there's some argument about that. When I started Saxton's band, we decided to try the approach that every dime the band took in, which was a substantial amount, would be evenly divided between each band members. I just used my own funds, our own funds, to buy all the uniforms and instruments and things. And the band would take 1 cut for maintenance and procurement of new horns and things. That was all right, but it meant that the band's needs were being met slowly when it needed new uniforms and things, or it just cost out of pocket, my pocket. We started the 2nd Cavalry Brigade Band, needed an LLC, and our philosophy is we're holding all the money to buy horns and uniforms and help take care of the horses right now. If we ever get everything we need, then the membership might be getting a bigger and bigger per diem per gig. But yeah, you kind of have to work that out when you start a Civil War band.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits and drawbacks, I think, of the band that we have at George Mason University. So we have obviously the large university, the umbrella that was able to, provide the uniforms and to some extent, help reimburse for printing off of music and creating the music and stuff. And then through grants and stuff, we were able to get instruments owned by the band, so we have a band set of instruments. But kind of what you were saying, when you start getting regular members in and they start buying their own, we're going to be cycling, at a university every if not every semester, every few years, it's just going to be new members in the band. So there's no consistency in that regards. So
No.
all the consistency comes from the back end and, the leader or whoever is going to be the leader at the time, is kind of the consistency there. So it's nice to have a lot of the financial things covered, but then the drawback is the consistency of players. So there's no perfect answer, I think, but every band will be able to find something that works well enough for them. Might not be ideal, but there's a
If you have the passion, you'll make it work. If you want to start a Civil War band bad enough, you can make it happen. You just got to be creative sometimes. But for the consistency, your band and my band eventually should own a complete set independent of anybody's individual instruments. Because what if Corey moves to Hawaii because they made him a deal he couldn't refuse? I'd lose this E flat over the shoulder. I'd use the E flat alto. And, we want to use funds to get a good set of instruments.
Yeah.
Preferably over the shoulder because it's easier to play on horseback.
Yeah, true. I think I saw online that you had non-brass band related projects as well. I know you were talking that you were involved in the dancing and stuff, but I think, didn't you have, I don't know the exact term, forgive me, but didn't you have, or do you have like a wagon show or something like that also?
Sure. We have a medicine show because you can't take the showbiz amusement part completely out of me. So we play at West festivals and things as snake oil salesmen, sometimes accompanied by the band, brass band, dressed more civilian style, and we sell the snake oil, and we have dancing girls. We've done saloon shows with the band and cabaret type shows. We do all kinds of fun projects and shows, and I always try to make them as historically accurate and entertaining as I can. We do dancing. Am I leaving out something we do? We do like song and dance shows with the banjos and tambourines and the bones and the fiddles and all. One thing that's really helped our small band, because we're not a very big, maybe 6 brass horns plus percussion usually, is when you do a ball of maybe 4 sets, they'll fry your chops. But it just so happens that almost every member in our band doubles on a string instrument. So the way we're getting around that when we play sit-down balls is we put the horns away for the Virginia reel and some of the other dances and pick up fiddles, banjos, guitars, upright bass, tambourines, and we play the set with the string instruments to rest our chops. So
there you go.
if you guys can find some doubles on string players, you grab a hold of them, they'll come in handy.
Yeah, we'll use all the music ed majors that are going through all their instrument methods, get it there.
Mars was playing the cello, and he just can pick up instruments so fast. He hadn't had much experience on it, and he played a very credible part in our last ball.
Ah, there you go. That's awesome. Your career has been full of, creating new projects and creating new impressions and doing all these wonderful things. Do you have anything kind of on the drawing board, or any plans or wish list items of things that you kind of want to get off the ground?
Well, besides the side projects, which I'll always do, I really want to throw all my efforts in the mounted band and keep making it bigger and better. And if I have a fantasy wish project for the band, would be for it to get up to 16 white horses, to be able to take the field with a full-size mounted band. And I think I can do that for like forever. It's been so entertaining and fun. And just because we play on horseback doesn't mean we can't take a concert gig and a ball gig. We have been, and they go pretty well. And their eyes light up right in the middle of a concert. I tell them, by the way, we don't just wear these cavalry jackets. We have horses. And the audience all want us to talk about that, even when they're not there. So I've hit it
awesome.
forward, I think, with that project.
I would say that when you're just doing those concerts without the horses are kind of free advertising for you, but it's definitely not free. It's a lot of expense here.
They eat a lot.
Yeah.
But I own a couple anyway. I just own more because we need white ones for everybody in the band.
Mm-hmm.
A side project you're talking about, here's something interesting. We put a call out because we want to recruit more members that will learn to ride the horse. We'll teach them. You know, my girlfriend was a equestrian major. She knows how to train. I know how to train. We're keeping everybody safe and sane on horseback. But when we put out a general call to musicians, I got dozens of women who said, I love horses and I love playing horn. I want to be in the band. That we felt so bad, we came up with a new idea. And this is sort of helps us twofold. One is we're getting so many gig calls that I'm afraid I'm going to burn out my guys, right? The other is all these women want to join. So we're starting to branch out and think of we're going to do a new project that is a bit of a fantasy project in that what if the US didn't get rid of their mounted bands at about World War II? Because that's when the last of the military bands went away on horseback. What if they kept going? What would that band look like? And well, of course, they have women in the ranks, just like all modern military. So we're putting together a project where we'll wear uniforms in more of a modern cut. We'll use modern shepherd foot cornets and altos and tenor horns and all, be a little bit like a British brass band. And also be able to offer people who hire us to have a more modern impression and let the women in that band and maybe eventually up to doing half the gigs and parades and some of the arena shows where it's not necessarily, doesn't have to be a Civil War band. It could be a continuing tradition mounted band. And that's how we're addressing the problem of the interest ladies have in brass bands and riding horses. Be a modern military mounted.
Yeah, there you go. Do the British have a mounted tradition also? Do you know?
Almost every country in the world has a military mounted band. The Guards band in England, you can YouTube them up. Beautiful blues and royals, and some of the bands, they have timpanis, they have a full wind ensemble. They use not just brass horns, they use reeds up on horseback too. South America has dozens of mounted bands. Spain, Italy, France. I don't think Canada has a mounted military band. We're one of the few countries that our military doesn't have a mounted military band. And in fact, our recreated band is the only mounted military band in the country. There's a cowboy band out west that's pretty cool, but they don't try to ride in the rank and they play modern horns and arrangements. But we're the only military one left in this country. It's just because we're a modern type army. I think that traditions of that kind don't mean as much maybe to our country as they do some of the European ones who still have.
But at the same time, it's interesting that we have the old guard fife and drum corps, right? That's definitely an older ensemble for sure.
Why don't they have a mounted band? I don't know.
Yeah. We got to send some letters.
The old guard discovered us. We did a Kentucky horse part gig with our mounted bugler incarnation of what we do sometimes. And the old guard guys were very interested in the detail. They looked us over and decided they liked it, wanted to have their picture taken with us. We did the arena ride through where we were playing fanfares in part harmony in front of them, and then the caisson horses were behind the modern old guard caisson guys. So the modern military is discovering us. We did one county fair as a foot band during the day, and we were going to ride in and play the Star Spangled Banner before the tractor pull. Hey, it's a gig to pay.
Yeah, there you go.
We were free to rove around anywhere we wanted on the fairgrounds, and we saw a military display in a big outdoor space. And there were modern recruiters there, there were veterans there, and we walked up and started playing patriotic airs. And the guy that was in charge said, well, great, the brass band is here. He didn't know we were coming, but he goes, you guys look legit. So at 12 o'clock, we're bringing in the American flag, and we want you to play cadence as they march in, and we play the Star Spangled Banner. And what are we going to do? We saluted and said, yes, sir. And we did it. So So who knows? Maybe the modern military will keep discovering us and maybe get something going on their own for a mounted band.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Like I said, the social media presence has been taken off for you guys, so it's only up from here. Yeah.
I mean, nobody had that in the original days, but everybody's discovering in your band, or people are discovering that band. I discovered you on social media. That, whoa, a university band. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool for sure for discovering each other, but then also spreading, the music and the time period and stuff. Yeah, it's wonderful.
And speaking of social media, this would be a great time to let people know where they can find you guys on social media and how to get in touch with you, if they're interested in talking further, or maybe looking to get on a horse, when we're able to do that and gather and play instruments in a group of more than one person.
We have workshops all the time with fellow bandsmen that want to see what that likes to come on over, and we'll put you up on a horse and you can give it a try. But we have a website now, and we've just started that because we've been relying on Facebook. So we've got our website at Cavalry Brigade Band at weebly.com, which we can send you in a message to or something. We've got for YouTube and Facebook, you just search 2nd Cavalry Brigade Band and we'll pop up there. And we have our email address of 2ndCavBrigadeBand@gmail.com. So people can get a hold of us that way.
Yeah,
definitely.
Great.
And
we'll have all that stuff linked on our website.
We don't have a recording yet, but we're going to work on that.
Yeah, is that something in the pipelines right now?
Oh yeah, the first one I do, all my research of mounted bands, because I'm looking at all sorts of books and gleaning out passages of the mounted bands. I'm finding mention of what they played, not the specific arrangement, but you can say they like Hail Columbia, they like Yankee Doodle, they did this, they did that. So a recording with documentable tunes, arrangements, and then use the original arrangement might be what our first recording will be.
Yeah, that'd be great. Something that we haven't really seen since Fennell has been a recording of sights and sounds and maybe narration too. I think maybe it would be cool to, since John has that diary of a cymbal player and stuff, maybe some recorded extracts of actual diary entries, or the bugle calls or something. That could all be really cool too.
what tunes Custer liked his bands to play and all. Big clop of the horses, that they make a pretty good accompaniment when you got enough of them on the asphalt flopping. It sounds really cool. So we can put that in there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
We won't put any sounds of shrieking members falling off their horse, though. We don't want
to. Yeah. Well, luckily that hasn't happened yet, as you said. So we'll try not to.
Not as bands. We also do combat bugler impressions, though, and there's been a few spills playing bugle.
Oof. Thanks.
Yeah, you have to ask John Connors about Connors falling in Gettysburg.
We'll be sure to ask him. Oh man. Were you involved at all with Steve Sharpey's 2 mounted albums?
Only in admiring them.
So those CDs are just capturing the music of those types of bands. He didn't have actual mounted bands for either of those recordings?
No, he didn't have mounted bands, and you've probably heard those beautiful recordings. Some of those arrangements are straight out of the microfilm. They're the right arrangements. Some of them are very Disney-esque and sound real snazzy and cool, but they're a mix. They're very well played.
I was going to ask one last thing. We do a featured album every episode, and we were wondering, you said you guys don't have an album yet, and we can always use your like YouTube and Facebook as our featured album. But do you have maybe a favorite album of this kind of music that you've come across? In your, I'm sure you have a lot. I'm sure you own a lot of them. But do you maybe have a favorite?
I liked the Saxton's recordings, since they're using original instruments and original mouthpieces, all in original arrangements. That's good. We have some of our sound on YouTube, but that's in a parade condition, just spontaneous taking pictures, so it's not smooth, perfect, but it's not bad.
Mm.
So those are good. One thing we didn't cover real quick is changing arrangements to suit your ensemble. We try to keep the arrangements as original as possible, but every once in a while we'll take the inner alto and tenor part and maybe change the voicing a little bit, but not the rhythm, to make sure the chord is full, because the music was written for more, like 12 or more horns, and sometimes we're doing our performances with only 6 or 7 horns.
So now that you've been involved with so many different bands and so many projects and stuff, have you ever kind of taken a step back and kind of viewed the American Brass Band revival movement as a whole and kind of reflected maybe on your personal involvement or maybe just the trajectory of the movement itself? Have you ever been able to kind of reflect in any of those ways?
I'm sure. I'm delighted as I can be that other bands are still being formed, and it hurts my heart when I hear of one like Wildcat Band or some of them going away. I'm just all for and supportive of all of them and all the forms they take, because I like to do certain things a certain way. Doesn't mean that I'm outraged when the other bands don't do things the way I do them. I think the movement is better than ever, all aware of each other and supporting each other. Back in the earliest days, we had very little contact with other bands. Well, there weren't very many bands in '76, but it's cool. I think it's growing and it's doing well. I think Civil War reenacting might be scaling back a little bit, but I think the quality is improved. So that doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I think people get less interested in places like Colonial Williamsburg or Shakertown at Pleasant Hills, all these beautiful historic sites. It's more important than ever to take living history out to the field and go to where the people are and not necessarily wait for them to come to us. So I'd like to see all the brass bands just keep being active and just keep going.
Do you think that maybe Civil War reenactors or that time period maybe suffers because it doesn't have a gem of a location like Colonial Williamsburg, where it doesn't have such like a largely accessible and mainstream kind of location for people to have access to?
No, I don't think it's hurting too bad, because after all, we have Gettysburg. That poor old town is one big
That's true.
I don't know, not amusement park, but
that way attraction.
It's an attraction. So no, I think it's doing all right. I think with the Ken Burns series and all that, and the golden age of Civil War mainstream reenacting kind of being forgotten, and the popularity of the movie Gettysburg and all, I think there's less interest in Civil War with young people and all, but that's why it's so important we exist, to try to instill that interest.
Yeah, I know Stephen and I have enjoyed through this show kind of exactly what you were saying, trying to connect people in a lot of ways. We heard recently from somebody that listens to the show how they said that they've read Dr. Sabina Klaus's work from the National Music Museum, and they've read her work before, but they never had the opportunity of meeting her. But getting to hear her on the show, they felt like they met her and connected like that. And all other bands, members of bands that we haven't had an opportunity to speak with yet, but how they've said that they've enjoyed, learning the history of the other reenactment bands and learning kind of what their philosophies are and their approaches and kind of where they draw the lines with certain things. It's all helping improving both their bands, but then also just we think the community in general, which we really enjoy seeing also.
Yeah. The podcast is definitely helping kind of connect people in another level.
Bill, we can't thank you enough for taking the time this morning, now this afternoon, for chatting with us today and talking about your experiences with the bands and the projects you have going now and showing us your instruments behind you. It's been an awesome way to spend the morning, and we're really excited to share your experiences with everybody who listens. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity to share it.
Thank you again so much to Bill Gay for coming onto the show. It was really awesome hearing your experiences throughout, starting and being involved with all these different bands, and especially hearing about the Mounted Brass Band that you started up in Ohio, and getting to hear the history behind that type of ensemble in the 19th century and hearing what it took to get that off the ground recently. So thank you again so much for coming on.
Yeah, definitely unique group there with the horses, obviously. I don't know that there are many other, well, he said in the episode, they're the only one around right now. So that was great. And like you said, they're looking for, some leads on instruments perhaps, and maybe some more members. So we'll definitely have all their information up on our show notes on our website. So if you're interested or want to talk to them or get in touch with them in any way, you can go there to find their information, as well as a bunch of resources.
This episode's featured album is by the Saxton's Cornet Band, the second band that Bill Gay helped form. This is Music of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. This is a great album of music from that time period of the Civil War, and it's all performed on original instruments and mouthpieces. So we hope that you go over to our show notes on the website and check out where you can listen to and purchase that wonderful album. Thank you again so much for tuning into the Early American Brass Band podcast. We hope you tune into our next episode in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. We'll see you then.